Ladies and gentlemen, we are live with Kristin Smith. How are we doing? How are you feeling? So nice to see you.
Hi, I'm feeling good. I'm a little jet lagged. It doesn't seem to go away.
I can imagine.
We're
I can imagine.
through here.
Unfortunately, it's going to be just as bad next year. We just heard that Breakpoint 2026 is going to be in London.
Yeah, that sounds like a big improvement over
I guess
this
a couple
time
of yeah.
change, so we'll take it.
And it's not in the desert, but it might be rainy, so umbrellas are due, I think.
We can make that happen. We'll make
First
some
impressions.
swag.
First impressions from the desert, from the capital of capital. As somebody who's been leading the charge as far as lobbying and representing the industry, the ecosystem in the White House, among other places. You're here now. You're rubbing shoulders with trillion-dollar giants and the degens. What are you doing? What do you think?
It's so fun. It's easy to get lost in Washington dealing with policymakers. It's obviously much more fun and pleasant to deal with them than it was several years ago when we were having such an uphill battle with regulators. But for me, it is very exciting to be around people who are building on Solana, and the energy is fantastic here. It is a really good sense that we've achieved a lot as an ecosystem, and there's a clear pathway forward, and so it's a lot of fun, and I've really been enjoying it.
Absolutely, and as part of our institutional power hour this morning on day 2 of Breakpoint, we've been talking to Matt Hogan from Bitwise was here. We had obviously the head of institutional growth, Nick Dukoff himself was here. We've been asking people over the last few days, also at Abu Dhabi Finance Week, what they think of the idea that all of this institutional growth that we've seen in the last 12 to 24 months comes at the cost of the sort of core ethos and identity of the Solana ecosystem specifically. I know you have spent time working in different ecosystems as well, but the retail focus, that sort of ideological, ethos-driven adoption narrative of decentralize, disintermediate, all these values. Is it a bad trade-off necessarily, or from your vantage point, is it simply a part of the natural progression, the maturity of the industry as a whole?
Yeah, well, I think it's a sign of success, right? I mean, I think we want institutions to come in, and one of the things that, when we're looking at policy in Washington, is we want to make sure that the new system we're building doesn't come at the cost of the values of what got us here, right? We want to get rid of intermediaries. We want people to be able to transact directly. We want them to be able to hold their own assets. This is a really important, these are important values, and if we're just building the same old system again, then we're failing to do our job. And so, am I...
I'm going to grab that from there.
This one's not working. Okay, sorry.
We don't want to ruin your dress.
I was saying such
Apologies for that. Now you have your own microphone.
Now I have my own microphone. Okay.
Exciting.
Okay, sorry about that.
So the ethos doesn't necessarily have to be lost in this maturity process. Essentially, is what you're saying. Which is a positive, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be lost. Now, obviously, in one of the cool things about Solana, if you look at compliance, as we bring different markets that have different requirements on chain, there may be different ways that you have to interact with them, but we don't want to do anything that compromises sort of the core protocol or some of the core principles. We want this to be the marketplace for everything, and we want to be able to issue any kind of asset on Solana, and so I think that's going to be different depending on which market you're looking at. But yeah, no, I think it's exciting. The energy is good, and obviously the regulatory progress is been, I think, a part of what's gotten us here, but it's really the people who are here at this conference that are building on Solana that is making all of it work.
So when you speak with these policymakers and these regulators in the White House and the SEC, how interested are they in the decentralization aspect of this? Satoshi never would have wanted Bitcoin to be an ETF, and yet here we are with a huge spread of ETFs. What's the connect for them with that ethos?
Yeah, so it differs. I think that there are some policymakers, there's some in the White House, some on Capitol Hill, some of the regulators that really understand sort of the value of decentralization. But that is not a concept that comes naturally. If you think about how policymakers go about achieving their different objectives, what they often do is they try to regulate intermediaries. So when you get rid of that intermediary, it's very confusing to them. And it's actually one of the biggest challenges we have with particularly the legislative process is for those who are new, their gut instinct is to force an intermediary in there so that they can regulate that. And we have to be like, oh, no, there are different risks here. Let's look at this from a different way. And we need to keep the intermediaries out of it. And so it's a challenge. But I think, we have some really strong champions on both sides of the aisle that do get it. And fortunately, like when it comes to policy making, you don't have to have every person in Washington that understands the details, but you have to have a core group that are willing to put in the time and effort. And I do think we have that. But more importantly, there's a whole infrastructure on the ground in Washington, D.C. There's us at the Solana Policy Institute. There's my old organization, the Blockchain Association. There, are hundreds of professionals that are working to make sure that we have the education, the foundational education in place that we need in order to get the policies done right.
Okay. And I imagine that gets exponentially more difficult when you have events like we saw in January with certain presidential meme coins. How do you convince these people that this is a serious environment when things like that happen?
Yeah, interestingly, the meme coin doesn't come up as often as I thought. But if you step back, the president of the United States issued a meme coin on Solana. Yeah. I mean, this is actually quite remarkable.
It's a great proof of concept.
Yes. But I think Raj and Toli were talking earlier about how most technology its origin is in entertainment, right? If you look at the internet, it was cats. If you look at NVIDIA, it was video games. I think it's not necessarily a bad thing that meme coins were the testing ground, because I think it shows that Solana is the fastest network in the world. It is, the most used network in the world because of meme coins, and that it's really had real life usage, real life test cases. And so I think, when we're trying to think about bringing other markets onto Solana, it's proof that it works. And so, but yeah, it's, we don't get much about the meme coins specifically, but there is often concern among policymakers, particularly on the Democratic side, just the sort of president's family involved in the business and the industry, and that tends to be more the issue that comes up, and if there are conflicts of interest there.
I believe you've looked into that quite extensively.
I have. I've done a lot of research on it. I'm quite a big fan of the political angles when it comes to it. That's why we're talking to Anthony Scaramucci earlier as well. He's a very outspoken both critic and proponent sometimes of President Trump. Curious from your perspective though, and by the way, I want to go back to something you said earlier, champions of industry and ecosystems. We forgot to do this, but congratulations to you and Miller for the amazing work that you guys do at SPI.
Thank you.
You're literally in the White House representing all of us, and I think that deserves a mention. So I will ask you about that in a second. But you mentioned some of the reservations. Democrats in particular have come out and they've said, this is crypto corruption. He's not a crypto president. There's a lot of slogans flying around, but as somebody who's trying to, again, as Finn mentioned, convince the world and regulators and the White House that this is not a deeply unserious industry, as many people accuse us of being, to what extent does President Trump and his family's ventures get in the way of that? Not just the meme coin, which I guess is easy to sort of sweep under the rug as a bit of a jokey endeavor, but his involvement with Binance, the pardon came up recently. There's a lot, it seems, that's easy to poke holes in and say, hey, look, this is cause for concern. To what extent do you feel that as a barrier to you doing your job?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I think we've had a lot of success on the policy front in 2025, despite the Trump family's involvement. Is it going to be a topic that is brought up against, particularly on the Democratic side against the president going forward? Absolutely. I mean, they're going to look at, every way possible to be critical of the president. So it certainly doesn't make our job easier as advocates. But that being said, I think, we were in a terrible place. We had Gary Gensler that was trying to contort the securities laws to take out all of the industry in the U.S. We were debanked as an industry across the board. It was terrible. And I would take an overly enthusiastic Trump family about crypto, any day, than to go back to where we were before. And so, I think this is a relatively minor problem compared to what we had. I do worry that there, is going to be attention to this that's going to complicate the efforts. But I think that's one of the reasons why we've been working so hard to get as many policy changes as we can into law or into regulation. And then, at that point, listen, when, JP Morgan is doing stuff on Solana, you're not gonna be able to undo that, right? And so I think, there's this kind of critical moment where, if we can, get more sort of mainstream institutional adoption, that protects us politically because, people come to rely on it and you won't be able to undo it.
But I guess the flip side of that argument is, we were talking with Matt Hogan earlier, and he said that the midterms do pose significant risk in terms of some of the upcoming legislation. If we don't get that passed before the midterms and the midterms go the way we don't as an industry want them to go, then they might not ever sort of be passed. So where do you stand on that debate of it's either now or never in terms of price specifically? I think the main impact would be on price in 2026.
Yeah, well, I think... So I have a little bit of a non-traditional view on the legislation.
We love that. We love that.
And
Hot takes
I'm going to
more
get in
than
trouble
welcome.
for this. But listen, we got the Genius Act passed. Like, that is law. That is not going to be done.
For your efforts into that.
Pardon?
Congratulations for representing the
Yes,
industry
that was
during
fun. I got to go to the White House bill signing
Yeah.
ceremony. I haven't done that in my 25-year career in Washington. That means that Solana is not going away, right? Because there are stable coins that are federally regulated that are issued on Solana. So, that piece of legislation was a huge win in terms of solidifying the role of a layer 1 blockchain. Market structure legislation is underway. It is a hugely complex topic, way more complicated than the stablecoin issue. There are, they're trying to deal with the token classification issue. They're trying to figure out how new projects can do fundraising. They're trying to regulate the spot markets. They may or may not be trying to preempt state regulation. They've now brought illicit finance into this. They're looking at tokenization of securities as part of this. These are all in and of themselves incredibly complex issues, and they're really difficult to get right. And so I think that there's a lot of work that's going on, but if you look at the stablecoin bill, the debate on stablecoins started in detail back in 2019 when Libra launched, before Solana existed. And
that was an interesting time. You were with the Blockchain Association.
I was at the Blockchain Association then, and actually we were going up and trying to talk about this isn't actually very decentralized. This is different than other crypto.
That was a crazy time.
It was a crazy time, and market structure. That debate started kind of in 2022, but it's just not as far along in Congress. So, listen, I think the agencies, some of the biggest problems with crypto were because the agencies were misinterpreting the law. If you look at Gary Gensler, he was suing everybody, trying to be all this is securities. And he went to court, and you know what? The crypto industry won in court. And then, we get a more reasonable person in there, and they pulled back any of the pending litigation. If the SEC can go and do rulemakings, and the CFTC the same on the derivative side, and actually change, get into regulation these principles. A lot of the work of the legislation, I think it'll narrow and be easier for Congress to tackle, so it won't be as many issues. But I think, listen, it's going to be Congress is working very hard. There were meetings at the White House yesterday on this. They really want to get this done, and they're really motivated. And I think that I think there's still a good chance that we can get it done in 2026. But if not, I don't think it's the end of the world, because I think the regulators will step in and solve some of these issues and take them off the table.
You say it's not the end of the world. It might not be the end of the world for the industry, but I think a lot of the retail participants of Solana specifically would say, okay, but it might be the end of the road for us, at least for this cycle or the foreseeable future, because so much of sentiment on crypto Twitter is price driven, and I know that you sort of think about the industry in a different lens typically, but I guess words of comfort for us as retail participants of the industry. What might the light at the end of the tunnel be in terms of the regulatory process, assuming things don't go great in the midterm?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you've got one more year of Republicans controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House. But you have 3 more years of Republicans controlling the White House. And so that means you have Chair Atkins at the SEC. He said he wants to get all equities and other securities on chain in the next couple of years.
That's huge, by the way.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
He's also said most tokens aren't securities. So there are
complete 180s from the previous.
Yes, and there are processes that he can do that can make those statements pretty permanent, and he's got 3 years to do those. So the midterm doesn't impact what the regulators do, but the midterms could change Congress. I would say, though, we do have good champions on both sides of the aisle in Congress. So it's not like it was before, where Elizabeth Warren was sort of dominating the conversation. You have Kirsten Gillibrand from New York. She's fantastic. She really gets this space, and she wants to do things correctly. So I don't think a change of control is necessarily a deal breaker for getting legislation done. So no, I'm pretty.
That's relieving.
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic that we're gonna get all these problems solved.
We were a bit stressed after Matt Hogan said to us, it's make or break in April. We were like,
I know. I just
what do we,
talked to
pack up the
Matt, and I
street?
was like, Matt, we got to stop telling people this.
We might pack up the street, get the pitchforks, go to White House.
But listen, there's other issues out there too, like the treatment of staking rewards from a tax perspective. That's something the IRS can do today. We're working really hard to try to get that one done. There's other legislative issues that we could address on the tax side. So we're looking at this from a bunch of different angles, and we're trying to use whatever process is possible. But I mean, it's just night and day compared to where it was right now. I keep getting invited to White House meetings, White House Christmas parties. Like, I didn't go to the White House for 4 years when Biden was there, despite constantly asking for meetings.
I find that so fascinating. And if you don't mind, for all the people that are watching at home, I kept banging on, before you came on, about the fact that you had been in the White House, not just for the sake of it, but to represent the industry and as a sort of result of all the successful, lobbying that you guys have done with Miller, who I think you spoke to not too long ago, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Teleport us into the White House in that moment. There was a lot of crypto representation, but there was a lot of Solana representation as well. What was the mood like?
Lily was in town. We were able to get her in as well. It was super exciting. Yeah, so Donald Trump knows how to put on a show.
Doesn't he?
And I don't know if it is, again, this is the only bill signing ceremony I've been in my entire career. It is very rare for legislation to get signed into law. But it was, it was only about 150 guests from the crypto industry as a whole. And, you enter kind of on the east side, and there's this sort of long hallway, and there's like a little, a duet of string players. And then when you actually continue to walk into the White House, there's a quartet that's playing more music. And it's like a very kind of immersive experience. And then you get into the East Wing, which is beautiful. And you kind of go, and eventually you take your seats, and then all of a sudden they let the media in, which is about another 50 or so people, and they're all in the back.
The rabid dogs.
And then the members of Congress come in, and they've kind of got seats saved in the front row, and then the Commerce Secretary comes in, and it was. So I've been to 2 Taylor Swift concerts. This was more exciting than Taylor Swift, and I love Taylor Swift. And it was just this buildup of excitement. And then, they play Hail to the Chief, and Donald Trump comes in, and, he's no farther than the guy standing right there. And he's just talking about making America the crypto capital of the world. And he's signing this bill and holding up the pen, and you can hear it's so loud with a Sharpie. And I mean, it was just, I was like, how did we go from where we were to where we were today? It's just been the most remarkable turnaround.
Yeah. You talk a lot about champions on both sides. You talk about, Republicans and Democrats and how they're all working together to make this happen. When crypto first started, it was based on financial inclusion, accessibility, democratization, and now we're kind of stepping into this hyper-financialization and capitalist world. Where does crypto sit on that left to right spectrum for you now, given the progress we've made?
I mean, I like to think I think it's a little bit more right than left, but there's a lot of sort of outcomes, that when I think of crypto, I think of people being able to hold their own assets, to having more access to services. I think that it's lower cost. I think there are a lot of things that appeal to Democrats that once they understand, they see, oh, wow, this is actually super democratizing. We're trying to take the power from centralized, corporations and share the wealth across, with the users. And I think that that's really powerful. So I do think when it comes to regulation, there tends to be, sort of on the sort of left side of the political spectrum, a desire to have more control and have a more sort of heavy hand. And I think that's where, the love of intermediaries is just a little bit greater. But if you look at the Republican side too, there are some like really strong like national security hawks on the right that really want to make sure that we're not being able to do too much globally. So I don't know, you kind of run into problems on both sides, but nobody ever goes from being like pro crypto to anti crypto in Washington. It's really only the other way around.
One-way traffic.
Yeah, it's one-way traffic, and there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of education. It's like a constant effort across the board. But no, I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to come up with like a reasonable framework that will last for decades, and that this is a technology that you can't ignore. And I think there's realization across both sides that this is something that needs to be addressed. Whereas before there was sort of this like, oh, like we're going to ignore that and it's going to go away. It's not going away.
How do you try and stop crypto as an asset class from being weaponized as a propaganda piece by either side?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or single issue voters as well, I imagine.
Well, I mean, I think I don't see them weaponizing it. I think I don't know if I've really thought about it from that perspective. I mean, I think elected officials in particular, and appointed officials who come from elected officials, they care very much about what people think. And so I think as long as the voters and the constituents across the country, are using crypto, are excited about a crypto and passionate about crypto, I think that will ultimately sort of trickle down into their thinking.
This evolution that obviously you've been a significant part of, going from extremely combative SEC regime where people were literally fleeing the country so they could continue operating their businesses, and many of them came here to the UAE with, you've got the VARA, Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, you've got the ADGM over in Singapore, you've got the MAS. To what extent now are we seeing a return of those companies, of those projects? And the main reason I'm asking is because yesterday we got news, and I'm going to make sure I get this right, that Binance received a full ADGM license. Circle received an Abu Dhabi license for full operations as money service provider here as well. So clearly there's a bit of competition. I'm seeing, who's the nicest regulator. Seems to be a reasonable competition to look at. Are companies now returning some or all of their operations back to the US? Can we be proud of this change yet?
No. I mean, I think we have seen developers come back, right? Because listen, if you're a centralized exchange, you're going to need licenses in whatever jurisdiction. You can't just pick up and go from one place to another. But I think it's the developers that just pick up their laptops, hop on a plane, and they can do what they do from anywhere in the world. And so we do seem to be getting a lot of that back. Like we see new companies that are headquartering in San Francisco or New York and actually trying to be in an office together again. Like it seems like we've come full circle on that. So we've looked into trying to quantify this. I don't have any numbers off the top of my head, but we're looking at actually doing something with my old from the Blockchain Association on this. But it does feel like people are coming back. But I think, seeing what's going on with, the Finance Week with Breakpoint here in Abu Dhabi, the UAE, I think, is trying to be very competitive and continuing to court these businesses. And I think we're going to continue to see that across the globe, because I do think is going to be a really important part of our financial system going forward. And, they're going to want to have those jobs but I think that's great, right? Like competition is good. Like I think we all, everyone here loves competition.
Forces us in the right direction.
Yes,
definitely.
yes.
Yeah.
But it shows, how far behind the U.S. was. And I think, when we do things like pass the Genius Act, like it goes noticed around the globe by regulators, and they're trying to figure out how to stay competitive and make sure that their policies are, similar to those of the U.S. So I do think the U.S. has an important role to play on the regulatory front.
Speaking of competition, I think Eno's about to come back on stage, and we're going to be competing for sound.
Okay.
The energy that he has is like permeating through this glass box. But I want to obviously end on a very, very bullish note. And I know that Finn has another question for you. But we talk about all this optimism, institutional adoption. We had obviously retail adoption proved its case. We stress tested the network with Donald Trump launching a meme coin. It seems that didn't really deter lawmakers, regulators from thinking that this is a serious industry. We're moving generally in the right direction. Price tanked a little bit. Okay, it's not too bad. Surely there's still something we're missing. Surely from all the experience you've had as a regulator, as a lobbyist, both previously with the Blockchain Association and now with SPI, surely you can identify some things that we're still not quite getting right in Solana land. Well, what would you say those things are?
Yeah,
I know it's a tough question.
That's interesting. So actually, you want to know what I think the biggest challenge, and because I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this, so maybe this is just from my perspective, but crypto just works at a different speed and speaks a different language as a community, whether it be within Solana or within broader crypto. And the rest of the world doesn't move at that speed. Washington doesn't move at that speed.
People actually go to bed,
Institutions, markets close. Institutions don't work at that speed. And I think that one of our biggest challenges is we need to start to convey the value of like what Solana is in words and at a pace that people can understand. I mean, if you look at, like Merrill Lynch, for example, you can now put a very small % of your portfolio in a Bitcoin ETF, finally, right? Like that just happened like a couple of weeks ago. That is a baby step. And so there's a lot of education that we need to do to a much broader audience. And so we need to learn how to stop talking amongst ourselves and share that message with the world. I think about my boyfriend's dad, who's 80 years old, former like badass investment banker. And for many times when I see him over dinner, he's like, how is this Solana thing going? He's like, that's not backed by anything, right? And he's well, one day I walk in, he's like, printed something out. He's like, Western Union is building on Solana. I was like, yeah. He's like, everyone thought that was Western Union was going to die, and now it's being competitive. Like, and he finally got it, but it took like a Western Union announcement for him to kind of have that moment. And so I think we just need to figure out how to relate to people outside of crypto and just start figuring out on a larger scale how to convey what everyone is trying to build here and the value proposition.
So the JP Morgans, the Western Unions, these sort of big recognizable names being uttered in the same breath as Solana, I think is moving us in the right direction.
Yes. Yeah.
But the job's not done.
The job is not done.
We were speaking with Anthony Scaramucci yesterday, and he pointed to the passing of the Clarity Act as the opening of the floodgates where adoption comes through. Are we over-indexing on the importance of the Clarity Act?
I mean, listen, I think if done correctly, it could have a huge impact on that front. I do think that there are pieces of it that the SEC and the CFTC can do without legislation. So if we get those parts done, I think it will have an equally strong effect. I did not realize, though, if you look at like the Genius Act, what a big deal that was. Look at all the announcements that have come out around stablecoins, and so I do think that getting a good bill signed into law would be a huge boon, but I don't think it's critical in order for that sort of institutional level adoption to take place.
Is it a good simplification to say that Clarity will do for a wider basket of crypto assets what Genius did for stablecoins?
I think so. Again, if done correctly. If done incorrectly, it could have a negative effect. So so it has to be written in a proper way that does support the ecosystem.
I feel like that could be a whole conversation in and of itself.
Yeah, we can go all day.
I know. It's great that we have people like the Solana Policy Institute there to make sure it gets done.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We want to make sure. It's very easy to mess these things up. But again, people are working so hard. They're burning the candle at both ends, and they're really trying to get this done. And I think, I don't think the crypto industry is gonna let something slide through that has a negative impact. Like if it does get done, it will be good. And I think that, I think there's a decent chance that we can get that done in 2026.
I love that optimism. I really love the optimism. I want to end on an even more optimistic, positive, bullish, perhaps blindly note. What's the single most exciting thing that you're looking forward to in 2026 that you can leave us with? The sort of optimism going forward, because obviously price action in Q4 wasn't quite as bullish as we expected it to be. Now we're sort of looking forward to April, to potential regulatory changes, but Q1 could still be quite bullish. What's really exciting you about next year? Yeah,
so I think what we're going to see out of the SEC is potentially an innovation exemption, but a rulemaking around tokenization, around bringing equities on chain.
Okay.
And I think if we update the rules, again, you don't have to change the law, you could just update the rules to do that. I think that's going to open the floodgate for upgrading all of the hundreds of trillions of dollars of assets around the globe to come on chain. And so
on Solana.
On Solana. Sorry. So I think I'm most excited to see what the SEC does under his leadership.
Excellent, excellent. We could go all day. We could talk about all the Trump news, the meme coin news, the regulatory news. You know what it feels like to be in the White House. Unfortunately, Kristin Smith, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
on Solana
thank you
Floor.
for having me.
Really, really appreciate it. And don't go anywhere. We are going to be back in a couple of minutes with Rebecca Rettig from Gito Labs, who was previously the Chief Legal Officer at Polygon. We've also had the pleasure of speaking with her a couple of times.
She's fantastic.
She's absolutely fantastic.